We are just minutes away from polls closing in California. For more on the races in that state, I want to bring in Mark DiCamillo. He's the director of the Berkeley IGS poll. He joins me now from San Francisco. Mark, welcome. Let's start with the race for governor. What are you seeing in that race?
Well, it looks like Gavin Newsom will most likely get the most votes in this election. But all of the attention in the last month or so has been on who his opponent would be. We have a top two primary. It could be a Democrat against a Democrat, but the late polls are showing that after President Trump endorsed one of the Republicans, John Cox, he got a bump in the polls. I think most observers now expect it to be Cox against Newsom, which, you know, for the Democrats in the fall, that's probably what they want. You want a Democrat-Republican race in California because the Democrats heavily outnumber Republicans almost 2-1.
And what about the Senate race? Do we have a better idea of who might challenge Senator Dianne Feinstein?
Well, Feinstein is really the only candidate that has really high name ID. Everyone knows who she is. A lot of voters maybe are looking for an alternative to her, but they don't really see it in the candidates that are running in this field. The Republicans don't have any named candidates. All of the 11 candidates running are virtual unknowns to voters, and there really hasn't been major campaigning. The Republican Party has chosen not to endorse any of the candidates, and it's literally a free-for-all. Kevin De Leon, who's the state Senate president, or was former state Senate president pro tem, is running, but he hasn't really generated much support within the Democratic establishment. Our polls are showing him doing very poorly. He was at 11% in our April poll. He's at 11% in our final pre-election poll. He wasn't moving anywhere, but even with small support, he's still favored to come in second. So we may see an all-Democratic election come November.
What about issues? What are you seeing as some of the key issues that are driving how Californians vote, both today and how they might vote in November?
Well, immigration is a huge issue, especially with the emphasis that Trump has put on the issue. I think that will be a major turnout issue for the Democrats in this state in the fall. It's not driving turnout in the primary. There's not much going on in the primary. This is going to be a very low turnout, by the way. But in the fall, I think that'll be a major issue. I also think that taxes will be an issue. You're going to probably have the recall of the state recently enacted gasoline tax on the ballot for voters to repeal. And if it is Cox running against Newsom in the governor's race, Cox is one of the guys who was the backer of that repeal initiative. I think he's going to make taxes a major issue in California in the fall.
So you mentioned that President Trump is certainly going to be a factor come November. What about in this moment where we are now politically, how is he factoring into voters' minds right now?
Well, you know, in California, he is not very popular among the broad masses. When you poll all registered voters, only about 30% approve of the performance of the president. In a low turnout primary, however, like today, where only maybe 25 or 30% of the voters are going to participate, you may actually get to some districts, especially the competitive districts in the southern part of the state, where Trump actually has a positive approval rating in those districts. And that's where it's going to be interesting. Again, it has to do with the very low turnout that we're expecting in this election. However, when we go to the November general election, a much larger cut of voters will be turning out. I think Trump will be a major negative for most Republicans running in California as we turn to the fall.
Mark DiCamillo, you're a longtime pollster in California. This is Ed O'Keefe with CBS News. And by the way, we've just crossed the 8 p.m. Pacific time hour, which means for most of California, at least, the polls are officially closed. Mark, what I'm wondering is, in all your years of polling, especially more recently since the top two system took effect, have you seen whether this newer system either increases or potentially depresses turnout on days like today?
Yeah, I think the backers of the idea of a top two primary thought that this would bring out more no-party preference voters, which right now are almost 30% of all voters. These are nonpartisans or independents, as you would refer to them back east. But those voters really aren't showing up in the primaries. And also, the top two primary backers thought that it would have a moderating effect on the partisan candidates running on the Democratic and Republican side. That hasn't happened either. Mainly it's because we're looking at this hyper-partisan state of affairs in the United States and in California. Democrats really don't have much to do with the Republicans. Republicans wouldn't consider voting for a Democrat. So the top two primary really, I think, has not improved turnout. And if you look at the history of the last 4 years, it's probably had the opposite effect. And then one other factor is that we used to have competitive statewide campaign initiatives that were voted on in the June primary. One of the largest June primary turnouts was when Proposition 13, the property tax initiative tax measure, was on the ballot back in 1978. The state legislature, in its wisdom, decided to move all of the initiatives to the general election in November. That gives voters even less of a reason to turn out in the June primary.
All right, Mark DiCamillo. Mark, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.